Tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone. So today we'll be, I couldn't deliver a handout this week. I was a little bit involved with some work. So this lesson would last for 2 weeks actually. Therefore, I'll hopefully give a full handout by the next week. So far we have discussed all what was mentioned under the conditioned realities. If you remember the chart, we are talking about the ultimacy of the Theravada tradition. We initially introduced what are the ultimate natures that can be truly found within the existence and also beyond the existence. So then we divided it in two groups as the conditioned realities and the unconditioned realities. Conditioned realities are the natures that need the support of other natures for their arising and also for their sustaining. Then unconditioned realities are the reality that doesn't need any support of any other reality for their existence. So then in the conditioned group, we had 4 categories, which were called Paramattha Dhamma. Then we had Uppadino Dhamma, Paramattha Jatika, and Anupanna Dhamma. I hope most of you are familiar with now, because we have been talking about these terminologies again and again for a number of weeks. Then we discussed the characteristic of all of these 4 categories, like Paramattha Dhammas, the natures that have their own intrinsic nature, and realities that are related with arising, that arise together with some other realities, connected with some other realities. So they were the Paramattha Dhammas. They were divided into present, past, and future. Then we discussed about 3 other stages of Paramattha Dhammas, some of the stages of Paramattha Dhammas. Uppadino Dhammas were the resultants that are supposed to arise as their karma has gained the opportunity. So it's a very important term, having gained the opportunity. When the karma gained the opportunity, the resultant mentalities and materiality that they have not arisen yet are considered as Uppadino Dhamma. Then we had another category called Paramattha Jatikas, which are not eradicated, which remains within the mind stream, associating the mind stream, which are seeking for an opportunity for their arising. Then last group was Anupanna Dhammas. Anupanna Dhammas are the realities that would happen if the conditions remain. And we also mentioned Anupanna Dhammas cover both Uppadino Dhamma and Paramattha Jatikas. So then the other side was Saṅkhataparamattha, the Nirvana, and so forth. So today we are planning to have an analysis about what are these last 3 categories. Paramattha Dhammas, most of the Buddhist ones who have studied Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, are familiar with the reality that truly exists. And then the last 3, Uppadino Dhammas, Paramattha Jatikas, and Anupanna Dhammas, are for most of the audience would be some new terminology. So we should have an analysis about them. What are their characteristics? How should we differentiate from each other? And what are the different characteristics that they have from Paramattha Dhammas? And also why all these 3 can be included in the Anupanna Dhammas. Also their relevance, and also how they are different from Anagata Dhammas. That is also something that we haven't discussed yet. So I'll be taking all these 2 lectures, 2 weeks, to have a clear analysis about them, and hopefully we'll be able to distribute them. Actually, the handout is written in Sinhalese at this moment, because I was doing the Sinhalese class advanced to this, which was so I couldn't translate it actually, because I was quite involved in some work. So yeah, we'll go into the chart, and today the topic would be knowing about the existing nature. of ultimate, the existing nature, the existing nature of the ultimate, or we can say paramattha's. It's better to see the Pali word, paramattha. Existing nature of paramattha. So paramattha, when we say paramattha, it's the bigger group. The bigger means the entire group. So paramatthas were divided into Saṅkhata, condition, and asaṅkhata. Then the Saṅkhataparamattha was being put into 4 groups: Paramattha Dhamma, then Paramattha Jatika, sorry, follow the Dhamma second, right? Follow the Dhamma we discussed before Paramattha Jatikas. Then we have Paramattha Jatika. And lastly, Anupadana. In Saṅkhataparamattha group, we had 5 Paramattha unconditioned realities, which we'll be discussing in 2 weeks. Then out of them, other than this group, was Panyati. This was the chart, main chart. So to be considered as Paramattha, something to be called Paramattha. What is the main characteristic? The main characteristic of a Paramattha is that it has its own intrinsic nature. If anything can be verified in terms of the 4 modes, which can be known with wisdom, it may be the analytical, investigative wisdom, and if something can be abandoned, if something can be developed, and something can be attained. If something fits into any of these acts of the sasana, we call it a paramattha. It means it has its own intrinsic nature, its own intrinsic quality, the basic characteristic is. So, in terms of that having an intrinsic nature, having an intrinsic quality, in terms of this criterion, that having an intrinsic nature, paramattas are existing, panyatis do not exist. So this is the first classification. Something to be called a paramatta or a panyati, what we have to consider is, does it have its own intrinsic nature? Can it be known by its nature or its function? So if something has its own intrinsic nature, that fits to be called a paramattha. If something doesn't have such an intrinsic nature, it should not be called a paramattha. It's a panyati, it's a concept. So what is an intrinsic nature? When we investigate in terms of for analytical wisdom, in analysis, for instance, we divide the table, we get into the some wooden parts, then we further divide each part, and we come into some particles. So even a particle is being divided further, we get into certain qualities, the material qualities like hardness, cohesion, heat, coldness, and pushing nature, and also color, taste, and so forth. So therefore, and those qualities are irreducible. They cannot be further reduced into another sub-qualities. Sub-qualities means other parts. So if something cannot be reduced any further, that thing should be considered as as existing. So then, so these, the such, and never a nature like a thing, a substance. Substance means something which consumes a space or which has a shape. A kind of a substance can never be the final datum or the final nature of the existence. So therefore, always in Theravada Buddhism, we are talking about qualities. We are talking about natures. And a nature has its intrinsic quality, means it can be known with wisdom, with the analytical wisdom, not with the normal day-to-day life wisdom. So when we have that analytical wisdom, we are able to verify the existence of these intrinsic natures. And then it doesn't mean that in our day-to-day life we don't experience the Paramattha. We do experience the Paramattha. When we see the color, when we open our eyes, we are sensitive to the Paramatthas. So, but the thing is that we always mix it with concepts and try to get into a wrong idea. That is a different case. But we are sensitive to the Paramatthas, intrinsic natures. If we hear a sound, that we are sensitive to the sound. Sound is the ultimate nature, according to Theravada tradition. So therefore, if something to be called a Paramattha, if something to be fit into this group, the main definition, the main requirement is it should have its own intrinsic nature, having its own intrinsic nature. And also we mentioned a reality and its intrinsic nature are not two things. There is no duality. It's only the reality itself is the nature and the nature itself is the reality. So in this manner, the Panyatis, for instance, we take a table. Table doesn't have its own intrinsic quality because it is a constitution of some other natures, some other qualities. It's not a one thing which has its own existence. So therefore, it falls into the Panyati group, the concepts. It is not an ultimate reality. So the basic criteria to decide to fall into this group is having an intrinsic quality or intrinsic nature. Then among the realities which have the intrinsic quality, so normally we divide them as Chitta, Chetasika, Rupa and Nirvana in Theravada tradition. What have these intrinsic qualities? That is how we normally divide them. Then among these qualities which have intrinsic nature, now when we talk about the Paramattha Dhammas, we have to talk about it in terms of the arising. In terms of arising. So a reality which have its intrinsic nature sometimes have arisen and passed away. Some realities have arisen but not passed away yet. Some have not arisen and not passed away. So in terms of arising, now anything to come into this chart, it has to have an intrinsic quality. So now after this first stage, we are not going to talk about this, emphasize on this, because if something falls into this category, it already has an intrinsic nature. Now among these realities which have this intrinsic nature, now we discuss them about them in terms of arising. Arising means they become obvious to us because they have come into the existence. Then what are the realities that are not arising are the potencies, the potentials that exist within us but haven't come into the state of arising. It means they are possible to arise, they would follow our mind stream, we are bound with them, but we cannot observe them as separate mental consciousness or mental factors or rupa. We cannot see them as separate entities as we can observe a certain mind which has occurred in our mind stream. As we can observe a certain rupa, the hardness within our body. So these potencies, the other part of the arising. So the reality in terms of arising, when we discuss, it falls into the Paramattha Jatika. these realities which have intrinsic nature, when you talk about them in terms of potencies, they fall into these groups. So therefore, here we can see, we have to take out Nibbana when we talk about the conditioned realities, because Nibbana falls into this group. So the realities, now from here, the Paramattha Dhammas, we are talking about it in terms of its arising. Below this, we are talking about the potencies. We are talking about the potencies. But still, we need to analyze them accurately to understand their differences. So now, if a reality has come into the existence from non-existent to existence and already passed away, that reality, if it has already passed away, we do not call it existing. It's a non-existing. Or not existing anymore. And also, if a reality that has not come into the arising yet, a future reality, that also should be called not existing or non-existing reality. Only the realities that have come into the arising but has not passed away yet are considered existing in this categorization. So now, when we are talking about the word existing, we have to look into it in different ways. Now, in the first stage, what is existing means to be considered something as existing, it should have its own intrinsic quality. That's the main criteria. So if something doesn't have intrinsic quality, it falls into the non-existing group. These are the existing, those are non-existing. If something has an intrinsic quality, that is existing or not existing, non-existing. Now, within the existing group, when we talk about the qualities in terms of arising, if something has arisen and passed away, if something has not arisen yet, both these realities, the past and the future realities, are considered non-existing again within this group. In the first stage, when we talk about the entire group, all of them have to be considered existing. Why is that? Because they have their intrinsic qualities. Even a past reality, even a future reality, should be considered existing. Paramattha can be verified with wisdom. Why? They already had an intrinsic quality. They will have an intrinsic quality when they arise. So, within this group, all the realities are existing. In which terms? Because they do have, or did have, or will have an intrinsic quality. It's not like the Panyantis. But when we go zoom into the Paramattha Dhammas, when we are going to analyze these existing natures in terms of arising, what has already arose and passed away, but has not arisen yet, are considered non-existing. The reality which has arisen but not passed away yet is considered existing. So this is the reality we consider as existing in this stage. Then we come into the second stage. Now the potencies. We are talking about the potencies. These three stages. If you remember, our explanation about the Upadino Dhamma was, now we'll just go line here. Now about the Upadino Dhammas, our explanation was, now before we go into this, we should know that from here onwards, something to be called existing, we have two main criteria. Now, these are the potencies that are possible to arise in future. Here we are not talking about the potencies, we are talking about the nature which has arisen, which has not arisen yet, which has arisen but not passed away. So, here we are not talking about the potencies, we are talking about the obvious level in which we can observe the Chitta Chaitasikas and mentality. Here we are talking about the potencies. So how do we consider a potency is existing? There are two ways to consider. A potency is considered existing if it is possible to arise. That is the first way of considering. A potency is considered existing if it has the ability to arise. So the second way of considering is a potency is considered existing if it has the ability to give a result. If it has the ability to give a result. Give a result here means actually to arise in another form. Right? So if something is possible to arise, that potency is considered existing. If that possibility is gone, then we consider that potency is not existing anymore. If a potency has an ability to give a result, we consider that potency as existing, and if that potency loses that ability, we consider it as not existing. So this is the main criterion. So when we come to the potencies, this may be something quite deeper to some audience, but I need to explain this before we go into the unconditioned states to clarify these conditioned realities. So I'll repeat again. So when we come to the potencies, if something is possible to arise, that potency is considered existing. And if that possibility is gone or is no more, that potency we consider as not existing. The same way, some potencies which have the ability to give a result, bring forth a different type of a reality, we consider that the potency is existing, and if it loses that ability, so we consider it as not existing. So the second definition will come later. So first we'll go and try to analyze how do we understand according to these terms. Upadino Dhammas, if you remember, how did we define it? A karma has been done, the karma force remains, and after it has gained the opportunity, after the opportunity was gained, it's gained. Now this karma is going to produce some results. Those results have not arisen yet, but still, after the opportunity was gained, we consider them as existing. So now a karma, after karma has gained the opportunity, we call this opportunity. After it has gained the opportunity, the realities that are supposed to happen are considered existing. So here, what we have to consider is, even though we draw it here in this way, what we have to focus, our focus should be at this point. Because these are the realities that are going to happen in future. So in terms of categorization, to be very, very accurate, they fall into the anagata, future realities. So when we are talking about the potencies, we have to focus at this part. There is a possibility. So if that possibility, if the conditions are there, if the karma has not been suppressed by any means, these realities are considered existing as a potency. At this level, is existing. Because the karma has not been suppressed. So karma gained the opportunity. We are supposed to be born in a hell or a good or bad destination. But we are not born yet. For instance, close to death. So we are not born there yet. So after it has gained the opportunity, before the arising of result, and resultants are considered as existing. Resultants are considered as existing. So as a potency. So what happens if this karma was suppressed or removed? Its opportunity was abandoned, for instance. If this karma was put down, what happens? These realities, right? These realities go into non-existence. Actually, the existing nature should be, we have to consider here. But I just I just consider that these are the realities that have not arisen yet, but we consider them as existing. Then what happens for the easiness? So if the karma was put down, what happens? These realities ceases from the existence and they come into non-existence. They come into non-existence. It means what? Now someone is going to die, so karma has gained the opportunity. Now we are supposed to be born in a good or a bad destination. Still we are in this very life. We have not been born yet. So, but those realities are considered existing. Why? The karma has gained the opportunity. That's the main criteria to decide. The karma had gained the opportunity. So if this karma was suppressed by whatever means because of gaining another karma or listening to Dhamma, or we have changed our mind and brought a new karma into the action, or we have done another very strong karma which can overcome this the opportunity, the karma which had gained the opportunity. So somehow if we could suppress this karma which gained the opportunity, those resultants that were considered existing already comes into non-existence. Why is that? The cause was put down. When the cause had the opportunity, the resultants were considered existing prior to their arising. So before their arising, the cause was put down by whatever means. These already existing, the reality that were considered as existing comes into non-existence. So that is how we consider. Now there is no potency for their arising. The potency is lost. The potency is considered existing as long as it has the ability to arise. So therefore, in this Upadana group, when the karma was put down, the karma which gained the opportunity is put down, we consider it as not existing anymore. I hope some idea was clearly conveyed. Then Paramattha Jatikas. Paramattha Jatikas are the natures that follow our mind stream, especially the latent defilements, and also we have the karma force, which I'll be talking at the end of the lecture. So the Paramattha Jatikas, the way we talk about the latent defilements, the defiling nature, the anusayas. So they follow our mind stream for countless eons, and whenever they get an opportunity, they arise as a certain reality. So they are considered as existing as long as they have the possibility of arising. They have the possibility of arising. So when there is no such possibility, we consider them as non-existing. So that making them non-existence can only be done with wholesome supramundane paths, lokuttara magga. Only when these paths have arisen, those latent tendencies would completely be cut off. For example, if we draw it, now this is the mind stream. So in this mind stream, these latent forces do follow avidya and tanha. They have possibility that they may arise. So there is a possibility. Potency is there. We normally do not differentiate them. Though they fall into the Paramattha Dhammas when they arise. In the literature, we haven't differentiated them. That's why I put the Paramattha, we normally say Paramattha Jatikas are included in Anupanna Dhammas. So what arises is not a separate reality, though we consider them as Paramattha Dhammas in this literature. So what happens is, if now there is a possibility that they arise, now their possibility, the existing nature is they are possible to arise. Whether they arise or not, it doesn't matter. They are possible to arise when the conditions can. So what happens if the path consciousness, if you think that this is the path consciousness, in great thought, it arises. For instance, if you consider the Arahanta Magga, entire avidya and tanha would be gone after that. There will be no remnants of latent defilements. So what happens? The possibility of them arising in future is no more. There is no way defilements could happen because the latent forces have been removed. So what happens? They come into non-existence. How they came into non-existence? Because of the path consciousness. A potency is considered non-existing. It doesn't exist anymore, and also it means it is not possible to arise any further. So we can look into this potency case in two ways. The potency is no more. That is one way of considering. The potency is not going to arise any further. So when we consider about this aspect, we consider that because they are not arising any further, they are not existing. It means that even they have been suppressed for some time, they are still possible to arise as long as they remain. So in the potencies case, we can look into it as something that really exists at this moment, and also we consider it as something that could arise in the future. That's why these potencies fall into Anupanna Dhammas, because we have to consider it in two ways. That something which exists at this moment, which has not arisen yet, which would arise in the future. So therefore, these lobha, dosa and moha are not possible to arise any further in our mind stream. So therefore, we consider them as non-existing. Yeah, we consider them as non-existing. When the path consciousness has arisen and cut off, they are no more. In the Upadino Dhammas level, if the karma which gained the opportunity was put down, those Upadino Dhammas are not existing any further. They were considered existing prior to their arising. Why? Because their karma had gained the opportunity. So if the karma was put down, they are no more. Now, in the Paramattha Jatikas, they were possible to arise if the conditions were there. When the Paramattha, when the path consciousness cut off them, past consciousness arisen, they completely are removed, and they are considered as not existing anymore. Then we come into the last group, the Anupanna Dhammas. Anupanna Dhammas were, these are the mind stream, and then if we consider this as the death moment, as long as there is karma and kilesa, avijja, tanha and karma are there. So we are bound to have some realities in future. We are not freed from these realities. They were called Anupanna Dhammas, the non-arisen realities from which we are not free. So what happens if the path consciousness eradicates them? If this is the path consciousness, if it eradicates these causes, what happens? Now, prior to this path consciousness, before the path consciousness, these realities were considered existing. We talked about this in the previous lecture. So that's why a Putujjana suffering that is going to come is considered as existing. We are not freed from it. So what happens when the causes are removed? Why they are considered existing? Because the causes are still prevailing. When the causes are removed completely, those non-arisen suffering or the non-arisen reality would come into this. So then we consider them as non-existent. So after the causes are removed, Anupanna Dhammas come into non-existence. If the opposite quality was aroused, these Paramattha Jatikas comes into non-existence. If the karma which gained the opportunity was put down, the Upadino Dhammas comes into non-existence. So their existing nature is opposite of that. When the karma has gained the opportunity, those resultants are considered existing prior to their arising. Now, Paramattha Jatikas, as long as the path consciousness is not aroused, Paramattha Jatikas are considered as existing. Right? I consider as existing. As the causes remain, the Anupanna Dhammas are considered existing. When the causes are removed, they come into non-existence. When the path consciousness arose, the opposite force was given, they come into non-existence. And when the karma was put down, the resultants would come into non-existence. This is how we consider the existing nature of Upadino, Paramatta Jatika and Anupannas. But when we come to Paramatta Dhammas, the existing nature is exclusively depending on the state. If something has arisen and passed away, we consider it as non-existing. If something has not arisen yet, we consider it as non-existing. If something has arisen and not passed away yet, we consider it as existing. So therefore, in the literature, when we consider about this word existing, the Pali term would be Vidyamanatha. Vidyamanatha. The commentators have used these words in miscellaneously without giving any specifications. So sometimes they would say the latent defilements are there because they are possible to arise. That's how they say. They are possible to arise. Not they are considered as existing, not because they are Vijamana. Because they say they were mentioned, the latent forces, latent tendencies, the defilements are mentioned here because they are possible to arise, but not because they are existing. What is the meaning of that existing? So the commentators have used the existing term in the first level. So something to be considered existing, it has to have come into this state, arisen and not passed away yet. So in that approach, these realities have not existed, are not existing because they have not come into the arising. So when the commentators say sometimes non-existing, they are referring in this level. In some places they say the latent defilements do exist, Vijamana, they do exist. Why? The path consciousness, the opposite path consciousness has not been aroused. So therefore, when we encounter the term existing, we have to consider it in which level the word has been used. I know this may be something complicated for the newcomers for the Buddhism, but I have to address this because we have to be very clear what is the meaning of the term existing. Now I'll sum up what we have discussed so far. Something to fall into this entire group, Paramatta, it has to have an intrinsic quality. If something doesn't have an intrinsic quality like table or a human, it is a concept. So that is the main criteria to decide. Then out of the realities which have an intrinsic nature, now we have to consider them in terms of arising. If something has arisen and passed away, it is considered as not existing anymore. We say the past is gone, it's not no more there. Don't worry about it. We say no. Well, please focus on the present moment. And if something has not arisen yet, we cannot guarantee how it will arise. It's also considered as not existing. Then, if something has arisen, a consciousness has arisen, not passed away yet, it's a momentary thing, we consider it as existing. So this is out of the realities which have an intrinsic quality, this is how we decide the existing nature of Paramatta Dhammas, not of the potencies. Then we come into these potencies, Upadino Dhamma. What is the explanation, definition? Resultants of a karma which has gained the opportunity before they are arising, prior to their arising, they are considered existing. Why is that? The karma had gained the opportunity. They are going to happen. If the karma was put down by whatever means, these realities which were considered as existing comes into non-existence. So then after the karma was put down, suppressed or removed, we call those Upadino Dhammas are not existing anymore. Then Paramatta Jatika, the latent forces, especially I was talking about the defilements. So defilements are considered existing as long as the path consciousness has not been aroused. Why is that? Still till that, the defilements are possible to arise when the conditions gather. When the path consciousness has been developed, they become completely vanish, they come into the non-existence. So we call the defilements are no more there. Sometimes we call it kilesakkhaya, the non-existence of the defilements. In some places we equalize it with nirvana. That I'll be discussing when we come to the Saṅkhataparamattha lecture. So that is the non-existence of Paramattha Jatikas. Then there are few lists of Paramattha Jatikas. I'm not taking all how they come into non-existence at this point. Just to give a slight idea here. Anupanna Dhamma, the realities that are supposed to happen, that which we discussed last week. If the conditions remain, some realities are supposed to happen, would happen. So they are considered existing. We are not bound, we are not freed from them, we are bound to them. So if the conditions are removed, those non-arisen realities comes into non-existence. Those non-arisen realities comes into non-existence. So that's why. Then that is how we decide their existing and non-existing nature. So I hope now it's clear in terms of Paramattha Dhammas, existing nature depends, they have arisen but not passed away. Non-existence are the reality that are passed away and not arisen. Yet, in the Upadino Dhamma, when the karma had gained opportunity, the resultants that are going to happen are considered existing prior to their arising. Now, after the karma was put down, they come into non-existence. Paramattha Jatikas, defilements are considered existing as long as they are possible to arise. When the path consciousness arises, they completely goes, vanishes. The potency is no more, then we consider them as non-existing. Then Anupanna Dhammas, the reality that are going to happen if the conditions remain, Kilesa and Kama, when the conditions are removed, the Anupanna Dhammas comes into non-existence. So this is how we decided. Now the final part is that regarding Paramattha Jatikas, we have two main ingredients, the Kilesas and the Kama. I mentioned that I will be discussing this at the end of the lecture. Now I was talking about the Avidya and Tanha. The Kama Sati, I'll call it K. Kama Sati, even though the path consciousness arises, that Kama would not be removed. Kama would not be removed, even the path consciousness arises. So how the Kama, but still we have a term called Kama Kaya. Kama Kaya means eradication of Kama. So what is the eradication of Kamma? How do we explain? The Kamma is existing after the Kamma Kaya is no more existing. So Kamma Kaya mainly, we talk about this K, if we talk about K. If you remember the last, the Paramattha Jatika's handout, I gave two terms as Kamma Sakti and Kamma Samangita. Kamma Sakti and Kamma Samangita. So last time someone from audience asked, what is the difference of these two? Kamma Sakti is the force of Kamma, remaining within the mind stream, regardless its ability to give a rebirth or not. Kamma Samangita means the Kamma that are capable of giving a rebirth. Out of the Kamma Sakti, Kamma Samangita is a part. So Kamma Samangita is the Kamma Sakti which is capable of giving a rebirth, and it needs the support of defilements, avidya and tanha. Only when they have the support of avidya and tanha, Kamma is able to give a rebirth. Rebirth means the rising of chitta chetasikas and kamajarupas. Then this Kamma Samangita, the Kamma Sakti. So what happens? When these defilements are removed, the Kamma Samangita loses its ability. The part of the Kamma Sakti which could give a rebirth loses that ability to give a rebirth. So when it loses that ability, we consider that Kamma Samangita is no more. Because it's just a part of the Kamma Sakti. The Kammas which could give a rebirth can also give resultants in the day-to-day life. So it loses its ability to give a rebirth. So then we consider it as not existing anymore. That's what normally said, Sankhara Nirodha Vijnana Nirodho. Sankhara Nirodha means it's not the Sankhara is completely gone. When we attain the path consciousness, avidya is removed. When the avidya is gone, the karma loses its ability to give a rebirth. So then that karma is considered nirodha. It's no more. In terms of realities, yes, it does exist as a potency, but it doesn't have the ability to give a rebirth. So we consider it is no more. The karma samangita is no more after the arahant. So that is the third way of considering the ability to give a result. Then here we also need to consider some fact that we do not talk much in our traditions, but which has been mentioned. When karma samangita gives a resultant vipaka, that vipaka is also considered as a different state of karma. I think that last time we had a short discussion about this. Now karma is done. For instance, karma is done, the karma sati, and then it gains the opportunity, upattana samangita, which we have not discussed yet. Then the vipaka samangita, it arises. So normally the commentators say these are the 4 stages of karma. 4 stages of karma. It means that when the karma was done, its energy remains and it ripens as a separate state. It's true that they have separate, we consider them as a separate chitta or chetsika from karma. But in terms of the tradition, it's the same karma has ripened. Same karma has ripened. So we normally say the potency which remains in our mind stream is identical, is the same thing which arose as a consciousness, which arose as a mental factor. The same thing should be understood here. The force which remain in the mind stream arose as a mental cluster. It's like the lobha chetasika, lobha potency, which arose as a separate mental state. The karma force arises as a separate mental entities. So that's why we do not consider them as we consider them as a part of the same thing. Yeah. So now, if we consider now this karma sati, if that karma sati, it should be supported by defilements, avidya and tanha. If this is removed, this loses the ability to give this result. Then this karma, now they were the anupanna dhammas actually. They were the non-arisen realities. If they gain the opportunity, if one day if the karma gain the opportunity, the resultant would happen. Now, what happens when this karma with avidya and tanha is completely eradicated? These things come into non-existence. Anupanna dhammas comes into non-existence. Now, this karma something at this level, this point, we consider it is not existing. Why it is not existing? It lost the ability to give a vipaka. That's the third way of explaining. I will not take much time on this because today's the main emphasis was to focus on the existing nature discussed in our Theravada tradition. Then when we come to the Saṅkhataparamattha, they are the liberation, which I will be discussing later. What is their existing nature? Now, in terms of the conditioned realities, I'll be discussing this same chart again when we come into the overall explanation about the paramatthas at the end of these lectures. This chart will be drawn again. Maybe it's too small or it's not very clear. Sorry for that, because I didn't have much space to do it. So these are the 4 ways of deciding if something is existing. These conditioned realities. Yeah, these conditioned realities. If something exists, how to consider their existing nature. Yeah. So this will be the lecture. I think I covered everything that I was planning to discuss today. Paramatthas and Panyattis. To sum up, something we call Paramattha, it should have an intrinsic nature. If something doesn't have that nature, it goes into Panyati. And in the Paramattha Dhammas, has to be existing at this present moment to be considered existing. Past and future are considered non-existing. Upadino Dhammas, as long as it has the opportunity Karma has gained opportunity, result are not considered existing. When the karma was put down, they come into non-existence. Paramattha Jatikas, as long as they are possible to arise, it means while they are existing, they are considered as Vijamana, existing. When the path consciousness arises, they will be removed. There is no potency of defilements arising in the mind stream anymore. So then they come into non-existence. Anupanna Dhamma, the non-resident realities, as long as the causes remain, the non-resident realities are considered existing. When the causes are removed, they come into non-existence. So these were the things that I would like to emphasize to conclude as a practical daily practical experience. Actually means to look into our lives, practically to understand our lives. Now, to keep them in mind, if we take this as a human being, right? A human being, the rupa is existing, the physical stuff. Then the consciousness and the mind, mental stream is working. So if I draw it in this way, it's working. Now, if you consider this is the present moment, there will be some consciousness to happen. There will be death one day, and then now we consider about ourselves. This is the mentalities. Nama. Now it happens. So, but we know that we have the point, even though we may have some pleasant mind moments at the moment, we know that there is a possibility that avijja and tanha is following us at any given time. When the conditions gather, they would arise. So there is a potency. Even though this may be a wholesome mind moment, we know that it is bound to happen if the conditions gather. So therefore, they are following us, not as a mind, not as a mental factor that is observable. Something as a potency follows us. We should know, consider ourselves that when we consider human being, we cannot just put them into nama and rupa and finish the discussion. Something addition is there. What is that? The potency of defilements, they would arise at any time, at any given time. That also is something ultimate, is an ultimate nature, because those qualities are following us. Whenever the conditions gather, they arise. Then there's another factor called karma. When the karma is supported by defilements, this karma would gain opportunity one day and produce results which have not arisen yet. So we are bound with them. We are bound with this suffering. So now when we consider ourselves, if this is ourselves, yourself, conventionally we call panyati, yourself is a panyati. There's nothing called a self, it's a bunch of rupas, collection of rupas, not one thing, and a mental stream. Each mind is different from each other. So there is no self. This is yourself is a concept. Why it cannot be its intrinsic? It cannot be found as its intrinsic nature. It's a collection of many things, constitution of many realities. So it's not one thing. It's a concept. So this is the ultimate explanation of a self. Now there are rupa, the material stuff, and the mental stuff. These are the past, this is the present, this is the future. Right? I'll just keep the future part, because I'll be discussing about it in the next lecture. What is the difference of future and these realities, these states, and what is the difference of the future realities. Now, at this level even, now think this is the present moment. Think that this is a kusala chitta, wholesome chitta. Also, while we are listening to Dhamma, we know that even though this is a wholesome mind moment at this moment, we know that we are being followed by certain defilements, so they can arise at any time, at any given time when the conditions gather. So that potency we cannot avoid from the diagram. It is there. That is why we need to practice. It's the ultimate state, but not in the level of Chitta Chetasikas which has arisen. So then these defilements could arise at any time and give some unwholesome mind thoughts. At the same time, we have an abundance of karma that we have done in this life and the past, which could gain opportunity in future and give results. Whenever they gain the opportunity, when we are close to death, these are the Upadino Dhammas. They are about to happen. Before that, prior to gaining opportunity, all the realities that could happen in future, we are not bound, we are not freed from them. So it means when we consider our lives, we have to always consider about the suffering which is going to come. We are bound with that suffering. We are not free from it. It's not a suffering that is not belonging to us. It is something that belongs to us. Why? This is the same. The entire thing is the self. Even though I specifically mentioned this, we have to consider this body, everything. This is the entire thing. This is the self. So when we consider about ourselves, we should not confine it into only Nama and Rupa. We have to consider the potencies that are following us, that are kilesas and karmas, and also the suffering that is going to happen in future. So this is very utterly necessary in Vipassana meditation when we come to Hridaya Vedana. We have to have a good understanding about this. The real fear comes knowing these natures that are going to happen in future. Anupanna realities, that the reality, that suffering from which we are not free from. So therefore, when we analyze a human being or a living being, normally what we do is we say it's two Nama and Rupa, it's not wrong. But when we acutely analyze this and explain it in detail, we have to focus on these potencies and also the non-existent realities, Anupanna Dhamma. They are considered existing even at this moment. Why is that? We explain it. Why they are considered existing. As long as the causes remain, Anupanna Dhammas are existing. When the causes are removed, they come into non-existence. So because the causes are still there, we have Avijja, Tanha and Kamma within us. These suffering that is going to happen in future, we are not freed from that. We are bound to that. So therefore, when we consider about ourselves, we have to consider about this suffering that is going to come even. And then the Paramattha Jatikas, as long as the opposite Magga is not aroused, these latent tendencies will follow us. That's why they can come up at any time and defile our minds. So when we talk about a living being, we also have to consider about these potencies. Because now, then in the following lectures, when we come to explain the Nirvana, what is the liberation? We get rid of some of these Anupanna realities. So then we understand the real bliss of Nirvana, how it can be the highest bliss, only when we explain it in this manner. So therefore, this will be the lecture for today. So we discuss about the existing nature of Paramattas, and I will be extending this lecture to the next week as well, to come into more subtle topics about this, and then we'll move into the Saṅkhataparamattha. Next week will be how to name them and so forth, and then how they're different from the future realities. Then we move on to the Saṅkhataparamattha's the week after next. So I will open the forum for the Q&A session.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Bhante. So hello, everyone. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or you can put your question in the chat box. That is a very interesting lecture, Bhante. So I kind of have a question about this. So let's say if we say that when you say that we consider being, then we cannot just consider Nama and Rupa, but we have to consider we have to put together with the potencies and the things that we are bound to experience. So if we put it that way, then we say that is some kind of a self it's not a cell that how do I say this? It's like some like a some kind of a group of entity. It's like separate between this being and the other being. So there is something there. Maybe it's equivalent to the cell, but not at the cell in the thing that we rejected in the Buddhism. Can we think about it like that, Bhante?
I'll put the question again. I don't know whether I need to clarify it again. So it means now when we look into this chart, we can see it's not only Nama and Rupa, there is something individual within ourselves, these potencies and so forth. So, and also something that carries from life to life. So isn't there something similar to a self? We know in Buddhism that self has been denied, the idea of self has been denied, but there is something similar to the self underlying the Nama and Rupa. Is it the question?
Yes, Bhante. Because for example, this thing of mine is different from yours. That's what I mean. So it's like individual thing.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Now, because these things are different from each being, for each being. So we have an individuality, which is very close to the self. This was a problem. This was also an issue before the third council. So what happens now? According to when we go into the doctrine, we find these kind of qualities. So what happens was if you go into the first question of the Katavatu, we see the Puggala, Atti Puggalo, Saṅkhataparamattha. So what some group, the Puggalavadins, they said, another group other than apart from the Theravadins, they mentioned, as you said, there is something that is individual to every being and also which facilitates this transmission of these qualities from life to life. And they mentioned there is something called a Puggala. Something called a Puggala, which is not a self, but an entity, which carries all these karmic forces, defilements from life to life, and it is individual to everyone. So Theravadians didn't like this idea because the word was not that much proper, and they were attributing it to one entity called Puggala. That Puggala transmigrates from life to life, but it is not a self. Why is that? The idea of self denied in Buddhism, it has certain characteristics. Self arises by itself, sustains by itself, doesn't depend on others. Or if we consider about this state, this does depends on others. The level of avidya, tanha increases, decreases. Kamma greatly depends on avidya and tanha. When the path consciousness arises, it completely goes away. So they do not fit into the criteria of self denied in Buddhism. So for that we have to understand what is the denied idea of self in Buddhism. It's sustained by itself. It remains unchanged as a core. It has a self-governing quality. It is able to govern other realities. So these are the ideas that are denied in the Buddhist teachings. So therefore, as you said, isn't that something individual like this? So the Puggalavadins went into an idea called Puggala. But the Theravadians didn't prefer this idea. They explained it in terms of Anusaya, Paramattha, Jatikas, Kammas, and all this. So in the end, I feel like they were not that much wrong, because instead of explaining them as separate entities, they brought it as one entity and mentioned this entity transforms from life to life, and they also denied that it's not a self. It's not a self. It is something that instead of explaining them with multiple realities, they attribute it to one person, one thing that migrates from life to life. So as you said, isn't there individuality? Yes, there is. And that is also the one reason why we consider this as a one thing, ekattanaya. This has one identity. Is it a self? Then we have to find out what is the self denied in Buddhism. For that, we have few characteristics of selves. Self-governing. It has the ability to do as it likes. It has the ability to control over other realities. It sustains by itself. And also, it sustains by itself, and it is the unchanged core. So these are the characteristics of a self that has been denied.
I see. Thank you, Bante. So does that mean that, so we see all of these forces constitute, let's say, an individual? So does that mean that when let's see, when this being attain nibbana, then all of these forces are destroyed?
You mean the parinirvana, right?
Yes.
They will not remain here.
All right. Thank you, Bante. Yes.
So the actually, now if we go into Paramattha Jatikas like Vasana and so forth, their non-existence happens for Arahants at the Parinirvana. Some of the Paramattha Jatikas cannot be completely terminated while living. Even some of the Paramattha Jatikas of Buddha, even like Asaya, it's like his Ajasya, his Asaya to support the beings, to help the others. So they get destroyed at the Parinirvana.
Please go ahead, Sayale Punya.
Good morning, Bande. So I have few questions. So first, when you mentioned about the arising nature in the Paramattha Dhamma, so that arising is refers the upada moment or the upada and the titi both moments.
You mean this, right? This.
Yes.
There will be no more. We have two explanations: arising, persisting, causing away. Right? So now we have like this is the arising stage. Arising like Upadakana stage. This is the actual arising. Right? This is the Titi stage, this is the Banga stage, like vanishing stage. This is the actual vanishing. So when I say coming into arising means after this moment, until this moment, reality is considered as existing. So whether it's Titi moment, arising stage, Titi stage, Banga stage, doesn't matter. As soon as the moment of arising, the actual moment of arising, this is the arising stage. Then someone could ask the question, what is the difference of arising stage and the arising moment? So according to Paramattha Dipani, arising stage means arising is the act of coming into appearance from coming into existence from non-existence. It was not there and it's now there. So this has a certain speed, arising speed. That arising speed is something plus. So that speed would reduce and come into a hold, like a stone is put into the sky. The acceleration reduces. Acceleration reduces with time. The acceleration reduces, but it still it goes, and then at a certain time, first its acceleration reduces, and then its speed also starts to reduce. So likewise, now at this level, its growing speed reduces and comes into a hold. Then what happens? It starts to fall down. So arising stage means that in the stage with that plus force, it's still going on. But it would come into a hold. So that is the entire phase of arising. But the real arising happens from this moment. The real passing away happens from this moment. So as soon as something has arisen, even though it's in the rising state, the Titi state or Banga state, still it is considered existing. Existing means coming into from this moment, it's existing. We don't need to talk about this
Okay, thank you, Bandi. So in the Bahiya Sutta, when the Buddha said the Ditamadam Pavisati. So like that, they are talking about the Paramattha Dhamma moment. The Buddha was talking about it.
Yeah. They were talking about the Paramattha Dhamma. Yeah. What about this? Something that is a Paramattha Dhamma. Just consider it as something has seen, not as a self.
So another question is from the another participant, because today he couldn't join because he has a meditation retreat. So he was asking about the time and space. According to his understanding, the Theravada tradition do not reject the subjective reality. So if the time and space is not objective reality, so can we say is the subjective reality? Because some Bandi, some other monks said, when we say the time and space is actually because our like attachment or like a Vebanasa or something like this. So how can we understand the time and space according to the Theravada tradition?
So I think I'll be discussing on this topic at the end of this session, like the Paramattha session. So shall I take it that time? Otherwise it will be a completely something apart from the topic. So I'll take it at that lecture. I'll be talking about time and space in brief in a future lecture.
Okay, Bandi, thank you.
Please go ahead, Robin.
Okay, Dr. Ryan. Thank you, Dr. Ryan. Good morning, Bante. Bante, I would like, I have two questions. The first one is the main questions. So I would like to ask about maybe our understanding of the existence. So far from attending this lecture, Bante, like I understand that all the Nama and Rupa have the Avijja and Tanha as the producing force, Bante. Is it correct in this way, Bante?
It's like this. Now, always life starts because of Avijja and Tanha. If the life didn't start, none of the Nama Rupa would exist. So in that manner, you can say all the Nama Rupa has Avijja and Tanha as the origin. It's a linear origin, not a direct cause.
Okay, Bante.
It's not a direct cause. Like because someone is born, all Nama Rupa happens in that life. Why is born? Because Avijja and Tanha. So therefore, if Avijja and Tanha are the causes for the rebirth, all the Nama Rupas or suffering in that birth is caused by Avijja and Tanha. It's a linear.
Okay, Bante. Then, as we know that Avijja and Tanha are like unwholesome things, Bante. So, like, we have like many grades of existence. This one is inferior than this one, and this one is inferior than the higher one, like that, Bante. So, can we say that for each existence like that, it's just the better version of unwholesome things, Bante? For example, or like for example, maybe the best the best beings is the Buddha, Bante. So can we say that Buddha like is the best version of the like the things that is produced because of unwholesome factor? It's just the best version, Bante. Or can we understand it as like Avijja and Tanha at the state of Anusaya is like neutral, Bante? It's not unwholesome because like good existence and bad existence has that indirect cause as the force. Or is it still another way to understand it, Bante?
Anusaya, Avijja and Tanha is always unwholesome. And all existence are based on unwholesomeness. All existence are based on craving and ignorance. All existence. So, and why I think the question comes, we have explanation, akusala produces unpleasant things, kusala produces pleasant things. So this is a Paramattha explanation. In Abhidhamma, we already say unwholesome and wholesomeness.
Yes, Bante. Like maybe like Brahma is higher than Deva, so but can we say that Brahma is just the better version of the unwholesome things like that? Bante?
Not say like that. Kusala produces pleasant. Kusala produces unpleasant. So this is the Paramattha explanation. But when we go into the ultimate, like noble truth explanation, both Kusala and Akusala produce unpleasant. In all existence are suffering. All existence are suffering. There can be even the Buddhahood is a suffering. You cannot consider it as a pleasant state in terms of noble truths. In terms of Paramattha, ultimate truth. Noble truth is more deeper than ultimate truth. Now, it's a part of the ultimate truth, that's true, but it's the way of looking is much deeper. So in the ultimate truth, we say Kusala would bring pleasant results, Akusala would bring unpleasant results, like Kusala Vipaka, Akusala Vipaka. But when we consider them in terms of Anicca, Dukkha and Anatta, they all fall into the unpleasant. So whether it's Kusala or Akusala, both brings unpleasant things. So every existence is an unpleasant thing, it's a suffering. So therefore, then we find that some existences are better than the others. That the reason is the nature of the kusala, nature of the karma. What sort of karma produces them? It's not only avidya and tanha producing the life. Karma, it needs karma as the instrument. So the nature of the karma determines the nature of the existence. But in terms of the bigger picture, whatever existence is an unpleasant thing is a suffering. Whatever exists is unpleasant thing. So Buddha once mentioned, compared to nirvana, all the existence are considered as dukkati, woeful realms. Compared to nibbana. Compared to sugati, dukkati is like a blissful state, and apaya is awesome, like woeful. But when compared to nirvana, all existence are considered as woeful. Because it's an unpleasant thing. So therefore, even a life of a bodhisattva is a suffering. That's why he advocated nirvana is the highest bliss. So then the next thing is now avidya and tanha. Avidya and tanha cannot produce alone. It produces through karma, the existence. Sugati and dugati, good and bad existence. Sugati and dugati. So now in terms of the noble truth, both are suffering. But still we see this is better than this. That is determined because of karma, not because of avidya. Avidya and tanha also plays a role. They also have a huge effect. I don't say that only karma can produce this. The nature of avidya and tanha also has an effect. But karma plays the biggest role. If the karma was pleasant, born in a pleasant stage, pleasant life, unpleasant in a bad, they are supported by Buddha. But when you consider about the entire thing, avidya and tanha have produced only suffering.
Okay, Bante. So it's depending on which context we see it, right, Bante? Okay, Bante. And the second question is like related to Dr. Ryan's question, Bante. So the Puggala, it is the concept that is mentioned by the Puggalawadin, right, Bante? I would like to know like how the Theravadin refute that idea, Bante. Like, is it refuted by the Theravadin?
They were talking about one entity called Puggala. So they were against that. There cannot be such an entity. There cannot be such an entity. That's what they refused. They didn't refuse the mechanism. They also had their own mechanism, like explaining karma and avidya and so forth. But they refused that one entity traveling from life to life. That idea they refuted in many ways, like 12 ways that they refuted. like I forgot actually. There are 12 ways that they refuse the. I'm not confident to teach it at the moment. That's the thing.
Okay, Bante.
Some references from sutras and all, they stated that there is no such a person called Puggala who transmigrates from life to life, even though they claim it's not so.
Okay, Bante. Sorry, Bante. Actually, I still have one more question, Bante. Is it okay? Just a short question. So about the Kama Samangita, Bante. So when we attain the lower part before the Arhanta part, so can we say that some Kama Samangita are destroyed, Bante? Partially destroyed. For example, for Sotapanna, the Kama Samangita to be born in Apaya is destroyed.
Anagami is Kama Samangata to be born in the Kama realm is destroyed.
Okay, Bante. Okay, Bante. Thank you very much, Bante. Sadhu.
Okay, thank you, Bante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Please go ahead, Sayale Punya.
Sorry, Bante, I have another question regarding like Mr. Robin asked us one. So, like when we talk about the Upanisya Pajaya, so the Purima, Kusala Dhamma, Akusala Dhamma, like that type, how can we understand according to like this process?
That is also Paramattha Jatika actually. I didn't put it in here, but I could have put it there. There are some we have ultimacy, concept, and something in between. Something in between. Remember, I wrote something in between. Ultimacy, Paramattha, concepts, and something in between. In that between, we found that there are three Pachya forces. Anantara Samanantara force, Asevana force, and Pakatupanisya force. So they are also something that are not existing. So what happens? A certain Rachita rising past, according to the Paramattha Dipani, a certain force like Upanisya would remain and would follow the mind stream, and they causes many good wholesome deeds to happen. The Pachya force, the Upanisya Pachya force. And also, as like Dr. Ryan they asked, what about paramis? Are also like we can either attribute it to Upanisya or we can have it as a separate force. So I will talk about them. Then you can ask, why didn't I put it in the Paramattha Jatikas? I didn't have the confidence to do that. So to be safe, I'll discuss it as something apart from Paramattha and not falling into Paramattha.
Okay, thank you, Bante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And yes, there is no more question, Bante.
I wish you all the best and thank you for joining. And may this merit the assistance of the prolongation of the Buddhist teaching. Buddha Sasanam Chiram Tiktatu, Buddha Sasanam Chiram Tiktatu, Buddha Sasanam Chiram Tiktatu, Sadhu, Sadhu, Sadhu.